This is the Desi Doubts podcast. Navigating mental health, societal expectations, and identity is not easy. I'm Dr. Sonalee Joshi, PhD in clinical psychology, therapist, and visual artist.
I'm Rupal Joshi, co-founder of South Asian Americans for Change, single mom, and lawyer. We share our personal stories and the most up-to-date research to give you the tools to figure it out one step at a time.
You don't have to do this alone. You've got this, and we've got you. Hey y'all, this is the Desi Doubts podcast, hosted by South Asian Americans for Change. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Sonalee Joshi.
And I'm your other co-host, Rupal Joshi.
Welcome to our episode, A Bubble Bath a Day Keeps Your Therapist Away.
So I love this episode title. It's really all about self-love. And obviously a bubble bath a day might not keep the therapist away, but self-love is important. And we talk about what self-love and self-compassion really means. Sonalee gives some fun tidbits on like the literature around these concepts. And we also discuss how it's difficult sometimes to practice self-love and self-compassion, especially as, first generation immigrants, people of color. And so we have some really good talks on this episode.
For sure. And you might be able to tell very quickly from this episode that we're all so passionate about talking about it. So I also want to contextualize a couple of things that you might hear while listening. So the first thing is we get right into it. We don't waste any time with this episode. You'll hear me ask right off the bat a very loaded question, which I'll save for the main episode. And then we get right into the answers. And we did that because we noticed we were starting to have some of these conversations off camera. And so we paused and we were like, we got to start rolling because this is the magic. So we hope that you'll kind of enjoy us jumping right into it. And then the other thing is at one point, I define guilt and shame, which I think are very important definitions for people to hear. But I make reference to a conversation that we also had off camera about some vulnerable things like childhood nicknames. And so we don't need to get into that too much, but that's just a little bit of insight into why you might hear us talk about that during the episode.
Yeah. All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, everyone. This is the Desi Doubts podcast by South Asian Americans for Change, and I'm Rupal, one of your co-hosts.
I am Sonalee. I think I'm your other co-host.
You think?
I do. I'm pretty confident about it, but I can never quite be sure.
Okay. Are you firing yourself at some point today?
No, you're stuck with me for a little bit longer.
Okay, good.
And we are joined today by another guest in the room with us. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I will. I'm Ravi Patel. I am from Long Island and been a champion of trying to solve our mental health issues in the South Asian community and had the privilege to join the South Asian Americans for Change as the director of outreach and sponsorship.
Awesome. It is so good to have you here. So do you love yourself?
Right now, I hate you because you're asking me that question.
Ravi,
sorry,
do you
no.
love yourself?
In all seriousness, that is a very good question. Ravi, why don't you start us off? Do you love yourself?
Oh, definitely not. I heard that question and I was like, very foreign thing to ask. And why did a South Asian guy ask that? To be honest, I think I've most been familiar with self-hate. How do you guys feel?
Wait, before we sort of ask that, why did you say it was unusual for a South Asian guy to ask that question?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever heard anyone even say the words self and love next to each other. That's South Asian male that's around me. Whether it's older than me, my friends, my cousins. I just like, it feels like something that you're never taught to think about. If anything, I would have been not surprised if you asked me like, what is self-respect? And what does that look like? I feel like that's the thing we talk about. And just, it felt like love would be too soft. It's like almost like in our culture, just it feels like that's like, what? You mean self-love? Like that's a waste of breath. Like next.
Yeah. Is it because it doesn't, like the act of self-love doesn't feel productive?
It's not productive, but it's like it's not a motivator almost. I feel like, when I was growing up, I felt like you were more motivated off like the logic of self-hate. And, when I heard that question, I was actually like, okay, so I don't know what self-love is. So let's do the opposite. I'm like, that helps you. What's self-hatred? And I thought about it, like, well, I've learned that from my therapist. That's when you're, basically criticizing yourself never endlessly, as well as saying that you have no value to earn love in life. And we talked about that in therapy, and me recognizing like that is how I feel often. And I feel like I'm not the only one. And it's partly because the culture is like, unless you're achieving great things or winning, like you don't have a reason to love yourself.
I think there is this kind of idea that you're getting at, that self-love or like self-compassion, as we often talk about it like in research spheres, is kind of fuzzy, right? Like men don't often get to be like soft and fuzzy teddy bears, right? Like they, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I'm getting the impression that you're saying that like it's not super commonly discussed. And whereas what you're talking about is self-hate, I kind of relate to this idea of shame, right? Shame as kind of a driver of success. That's the thing that motivates us. If I am, pushing myself at every moment that I'm going to get things done. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. Wow. The word shame. Oh, that's another big one. I think, it's definitely something where when you go through life as a South Asian man, and I represent that voice, right? Like I may not be everyone, but I think many other guys might resonate with this, that we go through life feeling like the only way to like thrive is you have to be built on the foundations of shame and guilt.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the culture is designed for you to know that, like, hey, it's based on what you're doing wrong in life. That's what's the anchor point. So you don't want to do the wrong things. But it's like you get so caught up with that recurring thoughts, like that's where your energy only spends and endures. And then the idea that actually like being kind to yourself feels like you're not supposed to do that. That's not acceptable. So there's no space for that. You're someone that's trying to earn make up for the shame and guilt in your life so often, that the idea of being kind to yourself, like it's like funny. I'm like thinking about like when I don't do well on a test. I remember as a kid, I was like, I wasn't someone's like, oh, it's okay, it happens. No, it's like I yelled at my head. I'm like,
yes.
What did you do wrong? How did you mess that up? It was so obvious. 2 + 2 = 4. How'd you end up putting 5 on that paper? And like that's the mentality that you get in your head, because that's. And I don't know if it was like my parents did that to me. I think they actually were kind of loving to me. There's a lot of things I know my parents love me, but it was just kind of like this obligation, especially as a first-gen immigrant. I feel like there's another element to that, and this culture of like you don't want to mess up,
Right.
so there's like a perfectionism almost that comes into play as well.
I feel like we can really all maybe resonate with that idea. I want to take a moment to really parse apart those two words that you just used, because I think they often go hand in hand, right? Shame and guilt. There's what we do and who we are as human beings. Mm-hmm. And I think guilt is this idea that I might feel kind of bad that I made Rupal talk about her nickname. I'm sorry about that. But that is a specific action that I might feel guilty about, right?
And that you
should! That might come from my values of wanting to be a kind person and not embarrassing my co-host. I'm sorry about that.
Sleep with one eye open, woman.
So guilt isn't always bad, right? I think guilt can sometimes guide who we want to be as people and help us kind of move towards our values. Sometimes guilt can not be as adaptive if we're still feeling guilty about actions that we've already made up for or changed in some way, shape, or form. But guilt is usually around what we do. Shame, I think, is much more of a sticky emotion. And in research, we often talk about it being more attached to who we are as people. So rather than saying, I did something that was unkind, I'm a bad person, would be kind of an example of shame. And I wonder how that sits with both of you, where shame has come up in both of your lives. You kind of talked about that in the context of being a first-gen immigrant and maybe with some of the messages that you had growing up. Rupal, what about you?
So 2 points. One, I mean, I'm hopefully not, I'm not a South Asian male. And so I I can't resonate completely with you in sort of like the way that you feel like you've been socialized to think of those concepts, but I do resonate with what you're saying about like the immigrant experience, right? Where it's like my parents were really loving too, and they didn't sort of, I mean, I got the whole like Indian dad, like, why'd you get an A minus, not an A plus thing, but I didn't grow up with like a ton of like sort of like lecturing and things like that. So, I also at times I'm like confused where it came from, but I have that voice in my head too, where and I've done a lot of work on myself and I've been in therapy for like 4 years. I've also done like 2 coaching programs. And so 5 years ago, the voice that was in my head was very different than it is today. But 5 years ago, I wasn't even conscious of it, right? Of the thoughts that were in my head, which is like same thing that you were saying. If I made a mistake at work or I like had a typo in an email, I'd be like, you stupid idiot. Like, why would you do that? Why would you type out an email in a car? Or like, why did you make a mistake on this research? Like, you should have known better. You should have triple checked it. And I was so mean to myself. And it was only after I started doing therapy and coaching that, and I can't remember who told me this, but it like fundamentally changed the way I was thinking is, and this is going to resonate more with women, and we can talk about why, which might be a whole nother episode, but I would never talk to my best friend the way I talk to myself.
100%.
Like,
Yeah.
and I had a real, like I had a best friend at work the first few years, and I work a very demanding job. And I remember we would always be going back and forth to like each other's offices to like make each other feel better over the mistakes we were making. And she left the firm like in 3 years.
Oh,
and
wow.
so after that, I had to be like, what would she say to me? Like if she had made this mistake. And that's when I started realizing like, wow, why am I so freaking mean to myself? Like I don't understand. So now that's my prompt of like, what would my inner bestie say? But I think a lot of South Asians feel this way, and a lot of immigrants, because we feel like we need to pay for the sacrifice that our parents made in coming here and be something. And so it's really like focusing on your thoughts and separating like who you are from what you do and how you think.
Yeah, no, that very resonates with me actually. Even the way you talk to yourself and how you talk to a friend. I actually think that is a conversation that we don't have. And again, thinking about the South Asian male voice, I feel like it's like a foreign concept to think of it that way because we think we're doing it, but we're not really. And then sometimes I wonder, I'm like, am I mean to my friends? Because like if I'm this mean to myself, I must be this mean to my friends. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I am. Maybe I am coming from a place of harshness to my friends. I actually notice patterns where I will not be satisfied with something that my friend has done for me. And I'm like, oh crap, like I'm not being grateful for my friend's contributions in my life. And I'm like, well, where's that coming from? I'm like, oh, right, because I talk to myself like this. So sometimes I actually, the opposite of you, which is I'm like, oh crap, I'm not being a good friend to my friends sometimes. I actually realize like that's where self-love, I think, is an important conversation topic because the way you see yourself in the mirror can affect your relationships with other people. So I'm actually someone that my therapist wanted to ask me, like, do you believe you have inherent self-worth and self-love? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I mean, like for purely existing, like the fact that you exist on this planet, nothing more. Not that because you got with this girl or you achieved this thing at work or your parents say you're a great kid. Like he's like, just for existing. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, no, you do not. And I was like, oh. And he's like, I don't think you do. And he made me realize, and I sat there and I was like, oh, you're right. That's not true. There's always a conditional element to it. And I think that's where it's hard to find the sense of self-love because it always feels like there has to be a condition involved. And I think it goes back to this idea that you feel like there's like a sacrifice or an obligation you have towards your family, towards your community, towards, I don't know, a greater order, a higher order. And, you know, that's something I was thinking about, like, you know, why one reason that we maybe didn't talk about self-love was like 30, 40 years ago, it's not really usually thinking about yourself. You usually devoted yourself to your community, often to your religion. We don't really get into a religious topic here because I'm not that strong in my religious identity. But I feel like that takes you away from like really owning this idea, like, do you inherently value yourself for being here, not because of something else?
I want to talk about like even what is self-love or self-compassion. And I think you're both getting at that, right? With this idea that the literature actually does show that across the board, we are kinder to other people and we are better at showing, compassion to other people than we are to ourselves. And we also see that compassion isn't totally complete without the idea of self-compassion, right? Because self-compassion is so tied to so many beneficial effects on our mental health. It helps with depression, it helps with anxiety, it helps with all of these things. It is not the same thing as toxic positivity. It is not the same thing as just giving yourself a break or lacking accountability in some way. It is what you're both getting at, right? It's this idea that my self-worth doesn't need to be tied to any one particular thing I do or any one particular role I fulfill. It's that I have inherent worth and I can be kind to myself and give myself grace as I go through my life and the things that I want to do.
I have a question before we sort of talk to that topic. So understanding like the difference between like self-compassion, self-love, guilt, and shame, sort of you as Sonalee the person, not Sonalee the very helpful clinical psychologist that's helping us understand all these concepts. How did you come to terms with like what these things mean in your own life and in your own mental health journey before you became, an expert that's helping other people with them?
That's a great question and fair to turn the tables on me. Totally fair.
Retaliation for the nickname.
Yes, definitely. No, I think it's a good question, right? Because I don't want to pretend that I've got it all figured out, and I don't want to pretend that I love myself all the time because I certainly do not. Like I used to work with another therapist. We used to lead groups together, and we both hated this idea that like when you reframe your thoughts or when we teach, any kind of therapy skill, that it has to suddenly be positive and we suddenly have to like think very cheerfully about ourselves in a way that's not consistent with maybe who we are as people. Some things suck. Sometimes we do not like ourselves. I fall into that camp all the time. But I think throughout my own journey, one thing that has been super important is kind of going back to this question of like, all right, maybe I don't love everything that I do. Maybe I don't love myself all the time. But am I moving towards the values that I really care about? And am I kind of maybe inching towards the person that I want to be long term? And if I can answer yes to those questions, then even if I don't like myself one day, even if I'm having a bad hair day or got a zit or something, or I said something stupid at work, I still kind of come back to like, okay, I value, respect myself. I love myself enough to keep going. And that is important. I think that's kind of how I factor self-love into my own life. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think there are some sort of different concepts that we're talking about, just like feeling inherently worthy and also having acts of self-love to, make sure you're being nice to yourself. But also like this idea of like thought work, which I've listened to this podcast for a really long time called Unfuck Your Brain. And it's a really great coach. Her name is Cara Lowenthal. And she just came out with a book called Take Back Your Brain. And she talks about how we've all been socialized in different ways. So you've been socialized as a South Asian man, first generation immigrant. We've been socialized as South Asian female immigrants. And with that socialization comes a set of thoughts. And do we actually believe those thoughts, or is that what we're socialized to believe? So for example, I had a lot of thoughts about being a proper wife, being a proper mother, being a good lawyer, being a good daughter. Are those the things that I actually believe? Like, do I actually believe that being a good wife or a good mom means that I need to constantly be perfect? And if I'm not perfect, like I fucking suck. I don't actually believe that. That's just what I've been socialized to believe. So I think it's also peeling apart those layers of like, what do we believe as humans of ourselves? And what have we been socialized to believe that we want to put away? And doing that training and training our minds to be our own and not somebody else's.
I actually could not agree more on that. And I think that's why, again, going back to like how this conversation topic can feel foreign. And to your point about identities, it's like, we talk about these because this podcast is around South Asian culture. Obviously, we have other identities, like you mentioned, being a mother or being a sibling or being a steward in society. There's so many ways to look at yourself. But across the board, it's just this idea that I think we all go back to being human. So I feel like it's like if you go back to like what is self-love, it's just recognizing that you are human. You will suffer, you will go through pain, you will go through joy, you will go through anger, and all these emotions are part of the package, the contract to like and live and keep going. I love what you said, which is like you can look at yourself in the mirror when you have those setbacks and say that, yeah, but I'm still here. I'm gonna keep going. I've struggled with that. I mean, I'm the first one to admit that like I've had some desires to self harm, to want to flagellate. I never got to a level where I actually went for it and did it, but I ideated on it. And it was scary to have those thoughts, but it was just like I could not let go of the mistakes, the regrets. And I realized that's when I was like, wow, my therapist right. I have zero self love. Now, since then, there is things that I've been thinking about when we were going back to this conversation. Is like, I think that what's the name of the title of the podcast again? This episode? Can you remind me?
This one, a bubble bath a day keeps a therapist away.
Yeah. Okay. What I definitely will say is I am one to have looked for some pleasurable activities to escape to as a way to feed myself love, to realize I never helped. And so I love how you named that the podcast episode, because a bubble bath isn't the only way to find a way to create self-love. And I'm someone like, I think one of mine has always been, the vice has always been travel.
Mhm.
To me, self-love is like escape the world, escape reality, go somewhere beautiful and nice, go to a party, like look, just have a vibe. And then I'm like, oh yeah, this is how I'm treating myself. But it's like, then I get back home and I'm still being hard on myself. I'm like, that's not really giving me self-love. What I've learned is it's actually when you take care of your mind, body, and health, that's one of the most foundational ways. So it's like when you wake up in the morning, you go to the gym or you go do your fitness exercise and you didn't have a great workout, but I still went. And I'm going to be proud of myself for like pushing myself to go do that uncomfortable thing. That's when I was like, oh, wow, that's actually real self-love. That's like when starting to become more enduring. And that's the one thing I've been focusing on this past year has been, how do I earn and create real self-love? And that's not just escaping to like foreign things. I don't know if you guys resonate with that.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I often talk to folks about sometimes self-love looks like, changing your relationship to alcohol or changing,
Oh, yeah.
the way that you invest in your work, right? It's not always, just comfort. It's not the same thing as comfort, right? It can be giving yourself grace as you make mistakes and try new things and stumble and whatever else. But it's not the same thing as just, putting on a face mask and calling it a day. It is thinking about how you want to live your life every single day. And that's challenging often.
Yeah.
And that's also not something that you have to do alone. I think to both of your points too, it can feel really isolating to start a journey of self-compassion or self-love on your own when you aren't really familiar with that idea, and when it does feel like, there are so many messages that keep you isolated from that. I think when we start opening up, when we have discussions like this, and when we kind of see each other, we can also start to see ourselves in a way. So I think having these conversations, being open with our own communities about this, can also be a way of cultivating our own self-love and looking inwards.
And I think something that you said is so important, which is it's not just going to the gym, right? And just taking care of your body. It's the thoughts associated with that.
Yeah.
I'm proud of myself for going to the gym.
Yeah.
I'm proud of myself for taking care of myself. And what you said earlier, which is, I know I'm having a bad day, but I know where my values are. I know what my goals are. I know I'm a good person. I'm going to continue. So I think it's like training that compassion muscle in your brain in a sense, because you could also go to the gym every day. And the thought that you're associating with that is, I'm such an unhealthy, crappy person, and I really need to like be able to bench 250 or whatever the heavy weight is. I don't even know. But it's the way that you're approaching that activity, which you're doing in like a loving way, that I think makes a difference.
It's going back to an intentionality to it.
Yeah.
And it actually makes a difference of like how the workout then goes, because then you like walk away from the experience feeling like it kind of determines the outcome of how you felt versus like the actual outcomes of the activity. And that's like probably part of it too, right? It's again back to like, I think there is like the degree in our culture we're very outcomes driven. And that's why I feel like it's hard to understand these things like self love and self respect. Because actually, I said at the beginning of the podcast, like, self respect to me has to do with like, I worked hard, I achieved great things, and therefore I respect myself.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that shouldn't be that much contingency. But when we talk about this topic, I feel like we can really understand it sometimes men when it gets into physical health, because it's something that we do get really socialized about. But I think it's like a good avenue to look and explore this idea of stuff that's foreign to us, which is sometimes soft and in a way saying self-love, because it's when you're at the gym, when you're pushing your body, but you're not trying to diminish your value for trying and actually going through the experience, the hardship, and coming out and walking away and recognizing you tried. You should be proud of yourself for that. I think you're so right. That's to me an enduring way to create self-love. It's not the times when you're at the bar just drinking or trying to be up cool and all this other stuff that I feel like is told to you as ways then to earn self-love. I really do think this is the path in the long run. And that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, not to be super research heavy, but I think the research does actually support the idea that positive reinforcement keeps a habit going, right? So if we are trying to shape a behavior through shame, it's likely not going to be as effective as celebrating those wins along the way and trying to, get to where we want to be.
I think one of the things I've taken away in talking here is like, there is some baseline where you need to create self-love to foster that love in your life. But how to create that baseline though, a lot of it goes back to just being human with yourself. And it's not really a thing for women or men or any gender identity. Self-love, self-respect, these are principles and concepts that we all are bounded to create for us to thrive and flourish and achieve things. I think all that comes back to the idea of just being human. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that's kind of something I'm noticing about myself, that it wasn't even a gender issue.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that on my own journey, that really resonates with me, because I have certainly had to, in my life, teach people how to treat me. I noticed that when I came at situations with low self-esteem, or when I came at situations hiding because I was sort of afraid to love myself out loud like that, other people treated me that exact same way. And then I got kind of mad about it. And I was like, yeah, I totally agree. Like, how can I expect that other people will treat me differently if that's the way that I'm treating myself?
Yeah.
So I think that is a really important takeaway, no matter who you are. And that requires, again, checking your own motives, checking the messages that you have gotten throughout your life that maybe make it hard for you to feel that self-love. I also just want to highlight the fact that, like, I appreciate, like, creating a baseline of self-love is important, but that doesn't mean that on day one, if you're starting that journey for yourself, you have to like immediately feel it. It can be a process, and it can come in little bits and pieces, and eventually, hopefully, you will feel like you are in a place where it's easier for you to be right with yourself on your own terms. If that's kind of gentler language than saying like, you gotta love yourself, because that feels kind of aggressive sometimes.
Yeah, and I do hate it when people say this, so but I'm gonna say it anyway. Like, it also comes with like time, right? Like, you practice being nice to yourself. Eventually, you get to a point where like you're like that most of the time. Like, now, I will I definitely never say it out loud, like, you're so stupid or anything like that. Like, I will and I hardly think it anymore either. Now it's sort of, you must be really tired. Maybe that's why you made that mistake. Or maybe you need to eat some lunch, and everyone make mistakes. And then after you eat some lunch, like, just figure out what the solution is and like go about your day. And that coach that I was talking about with the book, Take Back Your Brain, one of the sort of like helpful tools that she gives for people that are like just starting out on this journey is, if you have a thought that is not nice about yourself, is to just add "how human of me" at the end, which is kind of what you were just talking about. Where you say like, ugh, like, I made this mistake at work, but then you just tack on "how human of me" at the end. And that becomes like a little bit more compassionate and as sort of like a nice stepping stone to like starting on the way on a journey of like being a little bit nicer to yourself and eventually loving yourself.
Another resource I just want to plug for folks, if I can, is the work of Dr. Kristin Neff. She is a self-compassion expert, and that is her area of study. And she has a website called selfcompassion.org. It's pretty easy to find.
Ooh.
She has some really great guided practices, meditations. I think she has a book as well. But she is certainly someone whose work I have taught from when I'm doing groups or therapy or even, just being right with myself. So she's another great resource.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ravi, for being here. And really appreciate your perspective from, being a board member on South Asian Americans for Change, but also talking about topics that are very vulnerable. And we don't, often hear, as you said, we don't often hear South Asian men talking about a lot of this stuff. So just appreciate your vulnerability, your bravery, and like coming here to share with us. I'm sure there's going to be so many men listening to this episode that are going to appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think it's great that we're trying to have these conversations. I know for me, it was a little bit nerve-wracking to even come and open up like this, because I do think there's still a stigma in my head around talking about certain sensitive topics like this. But I know it's important to have it, and I want other, especially men, but just anyone out there to have the comfort to open up and think about, they're feeling self-hatred, and know that you're not alone, and there is space there to have these conversations to explore other avenues, because I know where it can take you in life. I felt it. I know other guys have felt it, and it's not a benefit to you or to anyone else in your life. And the best thing you can do is talk about it. First and foremost, take action towards it. And I feel like we got some good tips here today on things you can do. And know that in the long run, things will be okay.
I love that. Thank you so much.
The Desi Doubts podcast is a production of South Asian Americans for Change, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health care or therapy. Desi Doubts is hosted by Rupal Joshi and Dr. Sonalee Joshi. Our guest for this episode was Ravi Patel. It was produced by Nima Nardoni, Kirti Chanarasappa, Megha Pathak, and Nitya Charakuru. It's edited and mixed by Ravi Ray, and filming and pre-production was by Ankur Garg. Our theme music is by Rianjali. For comments and questions, email us at desidoubtspod@southforchange.org and follow us at desidoubtspod on Instagram. If you enjoyed the episode and are feeling extra kind, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify.